They say some places don't want to be remembered, that the earth itself can push a memory away, like a body rejecting a splinter. I used to think that was just folklore, something you'd tell kids so they wouldn't wander off into the woods after dark. But after what happened to me in Tomog, Minnesota, I'm not sure anymore. This isn't a story I want to tell. It's more like something I have to tell before I forget it completely. I don't know if what I saw was real or if my mind is filling in the blanks. All I know is that I was sent to find a piece of land, and I came back missing something else entirely. So before the memory fades again, let me tell you what really happened in the house where no one has ever lived. Back in early 2017, I was 6 months out of an internship at a local law firm. I was young, eager, and still stupid enough to think ambition was a kind of armor. The firm had me on retainer for a statewide biodiesel company, my first real case assignment. It wasn't glamorous, but it was stable. I worked long hours pushing papers and reviewing contracts, half dreaming about promotions that never came. Then one morning, the client announced they'd been acquired by a new owner. He wanted to shake things up. The news hit us like a winter storm. New plants, new locations, new paperwork. One of my senior partners said if we helped secure the right property for a new facility, the firm could get a major bonus, and I apparently would get my junior title dropped. For the first time in a while, I felt hungry again. The client's problem was simple. There weren't any available properties big enough to build on within a 100-mile radius. They wanted something rural, but accessible and fast. That's when I thought of home. I grew up in a small Minnesota town called Tomog, a place where everyone knew everyone until they didn't. There was this old field at the edge of town, massive and empty. I used to pass it every day on my way to school. There'd been a barn there, once a log cabin next to it, and little else. I remembered the property always looked wrong, too still, but it was the perfect size. When I mentioned it to my boss, his eyes lit up. He told me to drive out, verify the ownership, and report back. If I could get a name and contact within the week, it'd make the proposal viable again. I thought I was being handed my big break. In a way, I was, just not the kind I expected. I left the following morning, handed my cat to my mom, grabbed the maroon BMW the firm had lent me, and hit the road before sunrise. The farther I drove, the quieter the world became. Minnesota winters have a way of swallowing sound. Even the engine seemed afraid to make noise. I stopped for gas twice, past a couple of small towns I'd half forgotten. By the time I reached the outskirts of Tomog, snow had started to fall again. The same kind of slow, lazy flakes that never seem to land, just drift endlessly between worlds. The GPS froze 2 miles out. The screen just stopped. I switched to the paper map, but even then, something felt off. The roads didn't line up the way I remembered. Some had names I didn't recognize at all. Eventually, I saw the field. It looked smaller now, or maybe I'd just gotten older. The barn still leaned to one side, more a skeleton than a structure. And the cabin, one story, dark wood, a stone chimney, looked like it had been holding its breath for decades. There were no baths, no tire tracks, just snow, knee-deep and silent. For a second I thought about waiting until morning, but the sun was setting, and I didn't want to waste the trip. I figured I'd just take a quick look, maybe find a nameplate or mailbox, and be back at the hotel before nightfall. I left the car running. That was my first mistake. By the time I reached the cabin, the sky had turned the color of ash. The snow muffled everything, Even my footsteps felt swallowed. Up close, the house looked worse than I expected. Rotten boards, cracked windows, the smell of old wood, and cold air. But what stopped me wasn't the decay. It was the carving above the doorframe. At first, I thought it was graffiti, rough, uneven letters, etched deep into the wood. But when I brushed the snow off and aimed my flashlight, the words came clear. No one has ever lived in this house. The sentence hit harder than it should have. It wasn't the meaning, it was the handwriting. It looked deliberate, fresh even. The grooves were clean, untouched by rot. I remember whispering, "That's not possible," and instantly wishing I hadn't said it out loud. The place was silent, but it wasn't empty. I could feel that. The door wasn't locked. It didn't creak. It sighed like something exhaling after years of waiting. Inside, it smelled of dust and ash. The main room was simple, a bench facing a dead fireplace, 2 wooden tables and dried herbs hanging from the rafters, brittle and black. A cowhide rug covered most of the floor. There was a second door leading to a tiny kitchen, an antique stove, cracked tiles, an empty shelf. Everything was old, but strangely arranged, as if someone had cleaned recently, or at least tried to. That's what bothered me most. If no one had ever lived here, who had kept the dust from settling? My flashlight started to flicker. I cursed under my breath and tried to shake it back to life. Outside, clouds were gathering again. I didn't want to be caught in another snowstorm. There was firewood stacked neatly beside the hearth. Against better judgment, I decided to light it. It took 3 tries. When the flame caught, I swear I saw movement in the reflection of the window, a shift like someone stepping aside. But when I turned, the room was still. The warmth spread fast, and for a brief moment, it almost felt safe. Then I saw the edge of a metal plate by the fireplace, half buried under soot. Something about it caught my attention. I crouched down, pried it up with the fire poker, and found a small rusted box underneath. Inside were 4 things: a broken pocket watch, an empty flask, 3 spent shotgun shells, and a small leather-bound journal. It wasn't until I opened it that I realized the handwriting inside matched the carving on the door. The first page was strange. It said, "Journal written by," and nothing else. The name line was blank. The handwriting was neat but shaky, as if written by someone fighting tremors or fear. The entries didn't make much sense at first. The writer talked about losing time, forgetting things, trying to recall their own name. He mentioned growing up in Wisconsin, the son of a shoemaker. He remembered falling in love, building a home. But as the pages went on, the memories began to unravel. "This house is not mine." One entry read, "To my recollection, no one has ever lived here." He described days spent barricaded inside, clutching a shotgun, waiting for something to return. He couldn't remember what it was, only that it had taken things from him. At one point, he mentioned hearing voices through the fireplace, not from the chimney, but from inside the fire. Another line chilled me. It started when I lit the fire. Everything got worse after that. I remember closing the book for a moment, glancing at the flames I'd just made, and feeling something twist deep in my gut, because I had just done the same thing. I don't remember falling asleep. One moment I was reading by the fire, the next I was staring at a dark screen. My phone had died. The room was cold again. The fire had burned down to faint orange embers. I checked my watch, but of course I'd taken it off to warm my hands. When I finally grabbed my phone and powered it up, the time made my stomach drop. 6 hours had passed. It was almost 3 a.m. Outside, the wind had stopped. There were no animal sounds, no cracking branches, not even the distant hum of wind against the trees. It was like the world had muted itself. I tried to shake off the unease, convincing myself I'd just nodded off exhaustion stress. Whatever. But then I noticed the journal. It wasn't where I'd left it. I could have sworn I'd placed it on the floor beside the bench, but now it sat neatly on the table, open as if waiting for me. The page I'd last read was blank. I turned another, and there in the same handwriting was a new entry. You read my words, and now they read you. I can't remember your face, but I know you came back. The words looked fresh, still dark, the ink slightly smudged. I told myself it had to be some trick of moisture or age. But the next line froze my breath. Don't look outside. So of course I did. Through the frost-covered window, in the dim reflection of moonlight, I saw footprints. They circled the cabin, and they weren't mine. I grabbed the journal, the fire poker, anything that made me feel less alone. There was a noise outside, not footsteps, not exactly. It was like the sound of breathing, stretched thin and distant. I could see the door trembling slightly, as if air on the other side was moving faster than it should. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. Then came the knock. 3 slow, deliberate knocks. I stood there frozen, watching the latch jiggle once, then stop. Something whispered. I swear it did. It wasn't a voice, more like a thought I didn't remember having. You shouldn't have lit the fire. I bolted into the kitchen trying to find another way out, but the small window was nailed shut from the outside. The boards looked new. That's when I realized someone had sealed this place long after it was abandoned. The journal slipped from my hand and fell open to a page near the end. The words were scrawled in thick strokes, almost illegible. They come when you forget who you are. Don't lose your name. Don't lose your face. Something scraped against the wall. Nails or claws or wood dragging across wood. And then silence again. I did the only thing that made sense. I ran. The door flew open easier than it should have, like it wanted me gone. Snow lashed against my face, the cold biting hard enough to hurt. I remember falling my knees, sinking deep into the drifts. The flashlight flickered wildly, and in that pulsing beam, I saw it. Not clearly, never clearly. It wasn't a shape you could describe. It was the absence of one, a human outline carved out of the dark itself, like the air refused to remember what belonged there. When it moved, I felt something tear inside my head. A piece of me gone, pulled out, devoured. That's the last thing I remember before waking up in the barn. I don't know how long I was out. When I came to the barn, was half collapsed, the smell of old hay and mold everywhere. My phone said it was 5 a.m., but I didn't remember midnight. The journal was still with me, clutched in my hands like a lifeline. I flipped through it, searching for something, anything that would make sense. And then I found it. I threw the weapon into the hayloft. I cannot recall its shape, only that it worked. I looked up, and sure enough, something metallic glinted faintly above. It took everything I had to climb up there. My fingers were numb, my body shaking from exhaustion and cold. It was an old double-barrel hunting rifle. One shell still loaded. I held it like I remembered how to use it, though I hadn't fired a gun in years. And just then, I heard it again. That slow, deliberate breathing. It was inside the barn. I turned toward the noise and saw nothing, which somehow made it worse. I could feel it circling me, just beyond the edges of light, in the gaps between thought and memory. I remember whispering, "If you eat what you take, you'll remember this." Then I fired. The sound was deafening, but not because it was loud, because it didn't echo. The blast went nowhere, swallowed whole. When my vision cleared, it was gone. The barn stood still again, and all I could hear was my own heartbeat. But the rifle was empty. The spent shells smoking faintly, though I hadn't seen the bullet hit anything. I don't remember getting back to my car. I don't remember the drive home. One moment, I was staring at the road ahead. The next, I was parked outside my apartment, snow melting off the hood. Days passed. I told my boss the property wasn't viable environmental damage, I said. He didn't ask for details. No one ever followed up. Months later, when I tried to find the site on a map, it wasn't there. The coordinates led to an empty stretch of forest. Even the local registry clerk said there was no record of a Tomok property under that name. Every trace of it gone. I still have the journal, or at least I think I do. Some nights, I look for it and can't remember where I put it. Other nights, I find it sitting open on my desk. Always the same page. No one has ever lived in this house. Sometimes I wonder if I ever went there at all. Sometimes I wonder if I ever left. Lately, I've been having dreams of snow falling on an empty field, a cabin glowing faintly from within, and someone standing in the doorway staring back at me. I tell myself, it's just a dream. But each time I forget a little more when I wake up. Last week, I couldn't remember my father's eyes. Now, when I look in the mirror, I'm not entirely sure I remember my own. That was years ago. Sometimes I convince myself it's over, that it was just stress or cold or exhaustion. But every winter, when the snow starts to fall, I see that same light, faint orange, flickering through the trees. I still check my reflection sometimes, just to make sure I'm still there. People talk about ghosts like they're echoes of the dead. But I don't think that's what I saw. What I saw felt alive and hungry, not for flesh, but for memory. If you ever find a cabin standing alone in a field and you see a fire already burning inside, turn around. Because maybe someone lit it before you. And maybe they never left.